Hi Year 6, it's Mrs Withers here with Chapter 2 of Orphans of the Tide. So a bit of an unusual opening yesterday, so let's find out what's going to happen today. Chapter 2, From the Belly of the Whale. The old preacher flung his hands skyward. "It's back!" he shrieked, fleeing along the sea wall towards the streets above. "The enemy has returned!" "Oh no, oh no, oh no!" a woman kept saying, her hands clasped around the symbol of Saint Celestina at her neck. A young man fainted to the cobblestones. "Please, everyone, stay calm," stuttered the guardsman. "There's no need to panic." And all Ellie could do was stare at the hand. It gripped her ankle, freezing cold against her skin. She jerked her leg away, and it slapped down hard upon the slate, leaving a bloody smear on her sock. Ellie swallowed, kneeling to inspect the hand and the arm it was connected to. The hand was groping across the roof, as if searching for something else to hold. The arm was lean and wiry, and led back into the whale, vanishing between fat purple organs. "Hey!" Ellie turned to see Anna clambering over the top of the sea wall. "Stop!" the guardsman shouted, squeezing through the crowd towards Anna. "Come back here!" He lunged towards her and managed to get hold of her woolen jumper. Ellie touched the hand with the tip of her finger. It flinched away from her like a skittish animal. Ellie took a deep breath, then grabbed it. It was sticky and crusty against her fingers. She dug her heels into the rooftop and pulled. The hand stopped struggling and the fingers curled around hers. She didn't want to pull too hard in case the person inside was caught against something, but the rest of the arm came easily. Then a shoulder came too, bony and bloody. Then tangled black hair, a head, a face, a boy, gasping for breath. The crowd cried out. Anna broke free of the guardsman's grip, dropping down from the sea wall and skidding towards Ellie. She stared at the boy in shock. "What is that?" The boy rolled on the roof, trailing ropes of whale entrails. He was entirely naked. "Are you dying?" Ellie said, shaking his shoulders. His eyes were closed, and he didn't seem to be able to breathe. His mouth kept opening and sucking at the air, but it was like he'd never drawn a breath before. "I think he's dying," said Anna. "Look at me," Ellie said to the boy. "Open your eyes." But he just thrashed back and forth in a tangle of limbs. Ellie pressed down on his shoulders to hold him still. His skin was sticky and smelled of iron fillings. "Get his legs!" she shouted, and Anna fell down flat on his kicking feet. Ellie sat on his chest, his nails clawing blindly at her throat. Grimacing, she put her thumb and fingers to his eyelids and forced them open. The eyes stared upwards, rolling back like a blood-maddened shark's. "Look at me," Ellie said. The boy growled. "Look at me!" His eyes flashed down and found her. Ellie gasped. Grey-blue, the colour of a cold sea. She blinked hard, trying to focus. "Listen," she said, as calmly as she could manage. "I need you to do as I do." She inhaled slowly through her nose, exaggerating the sound, a hand on her chest to demonstrate how it rose with her breath. She exhaled gently through her mouth, and could see him trying to copy her. But his nostrils flared uncertainly. It wasn't working. "Keep him still," she told Anna. She knelt by his side and pinched his nose, holding tight even when he shook his head furiously. She clamped her lips to his and breathed deeply into his mouth. A woman shrieked from the sea wall. "What are you doing?" the guardsman cried. He had at last managed to scramble down to the rooftop, but stood paralysed by horror. Ellie came up for breath, then put her lips to the boy's again. He stared at her as she did it, his eyes wide. A third time she drew a deep breath and shared it with him, a fourth and a fifth. Then As she took a sixth breath, the boy's mouth opened, and he sucked in a lungful of air. Ellie laughed in relief. The boy drew deep, shuddering breaths at first, and then sped up, gulping the air hungrily. "Slow down," she warned, breathing slowly again to remind him. "Like this. Now, stand up and put your hands on your hips like I'm doing. It'll open your lungs." He stared at her intensely, his face sharp and menacing. Slowly he seemed to understand and placed his hands on his hips. Ellie looked down to check he was doing it right, then covered her eyes. "Sorry," she said. She'd forgotten he was naked. Could someone get us a blanket?" The crowd shrank back. The young guardsman kept staring at the blood, his face turning paler. Ellie sighed and took off her scarf. "Here," she said. "You can wrap this around your waist." The boy stared at the fabric, blinking in confusion. "I'll do it," said Anna, snatching the scarf from Ellie's hand and rushing at him. "Anna, be careful!" The boy's eyes flashed and he leapt at Anna, grabbing her shoulders and pushing her away. Anna tumbled into Ellie, and the boy staggered. His legs didn't seem to work properly. "Get away!" he yelled. Sorry about that. "Get away!" he yelled hoarsely, and fell back against the whale. "You can talk!" Ellie cried, helping Anna to her feet. The boy picked up Ellie's scarf. After a moment's hesitation, he wrapped it around his waist. Tying it at one side. "How did you—" Ellie stammered. Why were you in that whale?" But the boy wasn't listening. He turned and looked at the hole in the whale, seemingly unaffected by the smell. He noticed the crowd watching him in silent horror. He shivered, and Ellie remembered how cold his skin had felt. A faded blue greatcoat landed at her feet with a thump. The young guardsman was standing 10 feet away. He was deliberately not looking at the blood-covered boy, his hand held firmly over his mouth. "Thanks," said Ellie. She approached the boy, and he tensed, clenching his fists. She took another small step, holding out the coat. He was skinny, yet muscular-looking, and his body heaved with every breath he drew. Ellie stepped cautiously to his side and draped the coat around his shoulders. "What's your name?" she asked. The boy opened his mouth, closed it, and seemed disturbed by the lack of words that came out in between. "I think we should call him Seth," said Anna. "He's not a pet," said Ellie. "It's a good name. It sounds like the sea." Ellie shrugged. "I suppose it will do until you remember your real one. Mine's Ellie," she added. "Ellie Lancaster." She put out her hand for the boy to shake, and he stared at it and did nothing. "Here, let's get the whale blood off you." Ellie retrieved a handkerchief from the pocket and soaked it in water from her hip flask. "Do you mind?" she said, the cloth poised by his face. Again he did nothing, which Ellie took to mean he didn't mind, and, with careful movements, she wiped his brow, his cheeks, his chin, revealing a boy around the same age as Ellie and Anna, his face unblemished, save for tiny crinkles at the sides of his eyes, like he smiled a lot, and a single crease on his brow, like he frowned a lot too. He had thick black eyebrows and a mess of black, blood-soaked hair. He had a prominent, high-bridged nose, wide cheekbones, and his skin was light brown. He stared at her with his large sea-blue eyes, and Ellie found she couldn't look away. Anna barged her with one shoulder. "Ow! Right. We should get you somewhere warm." The boy glared at his hands. "Where am I?" he asked. His voice was harsh like sandpaper. The Angelus waterfront, said Ellie. Waterfront, he said. Waterfront of what? This boy really was confused. Of the city. Which city? Ellie stared at him, puzzled and a little frightened. There was only one city. She pointed upwards, so that he could see it towering above them. The city, a mountainous grey roost of ancient buildings, swarming with swanking seagulls. The boy's gaze flitted from chimney to gargoyle, following the serrated lines of streets and stairways that cut down from the peak of the city to the sea. He stared at 3 little rowing boats, tied to metal hoops, swaying in the gentle tug of the waves. He looked out to the horizon, and then winced. "What's that noise?" he said. "Where is that noise coming from?" He put his hands to his ears, gritting his teeth. Anna and Ellie shared a glance. "Where are my brothers and sisters?" he asked. Ellie scratched her head. I don't know." There was a commotion on the sea wall. Ellie could hear the old preacher returning from the streets above, talking eagerly in a shrill voice. "It's the enemy!" he screeched. "I was just leading a funeral at the Church of St. Horace, you see, Master Inquisitor, when I heard all this uproar." "What's happening?" said Seth. "An Inquisitor's coming," said Ellie, toying nervously with a hole in her coat sleeve. "But don't worry, you'll be fine, unless it's—" The crowd parted. People were falling over each other to keep their distance from the new arrival. "Oh no," said Ellie. A powerfully built man appeared at the sea wall, taller than anyone in the crowd. He wore a black sealskin greatcoat that spilled down to his ankles, and a silver chain across his chest. He had a thick neck and broad shoulders, and a fat face that was pale and puffy, haunted by a shadow of handsomeness that had been lost along the way. His eyes were deep, dark pits and held no expression. He looked like the corpse of a woman, the corpse of whom death was a small inconvenience. Seth raised an eyebrow. "Who's that?" "He's—" Ellie's mouth was dry. "Inquisitor Hargraf." "I had just arrived," the preacher prattled on, "when this boy burst from a whale. It must be the work of the enemy." "Silence!" Hargraf rumbled. "I will judge that for myself." A balding, diminutive man dropped to his knees in front of Hargraf. "St. Killian," he cried, "save us." "On your feet," Hargraf said. "I'm not a saint yet. Only dead men get to be saints." He vaulted over the sea wall, his black boots crunching slate as he landed on the floor. His eyes swept from Seth to the hole in the whale, then back again. He took 2 steps towards Seth, but after a moment's pause, took a small step back. It was odd to see such a monster of a man hesitate before this skinny, barely dressed boy, yet Ellie almost thought she saw fear flicker in Hargraf's dead eyes. With his right hand, Hargraf rubbed absently at the empty left sleeve of his greatcoat, which lay folded in half against his body, held by a silver pin. The arm that should have been inside it had since been taken from him. "What do you want?" said Seth. He spoke like a grown man, in a serious, commanding tone. "What were you doing inside that whale?" said Hargraf. "Sir, the boy's done nothing wrong." Ellie stepped quickly between them. "He was stuck in that whale. I had to rescue him." Hargraf showed no sign of hearing Ellie, or seeing her either. His eyes drifted impassively over Seth, like a butcher deciding how to carve up a carcass. "Do you see it, child?" he asked Seth, in a quiet growl. Seth frowned. "See what?" "The enemy." "Who?" "The god who drowned the gods. It's been speaking to you, hasn't it? It saved you from this whale." "I saved him from the whale," said Ellie. Still, Hargraf ignored her. Only the vessel could survive being inside a whale, he said. What's the vessel? Said Seth. You are, said Hargraf. That's ridiculous, said Ellie. What would the vessel be doing inside a whale? Hargraf's hand moved towards the hilt of his sword. Ellie breathed in sharply. Seth's whole body tensed, his hands clenching to tight fists. Hargraf reached past his weapon into his coat pocket. He took out a small pistol, and Ellie barely had time to cry out before he pointed it at Seth and pulled the trigger. No! There was no gunshot, just a sharp hiss, and something embedded itself into Seth's neck with a thick thud. Seth clutched at it, a metal dart protruding by 3 inches. He fell to his knees. Ellie caught hold of him, but he was heavy, his eyes shut, and he tumbled through her arms to the slate. What did you do to him? She cried, putting 2 fingers beneath his chin to check he still had a pulse. Hargraf returned the pistol to his pocket. A sedative, he said. Your mother's greatest invention. If the vessel is unconscious, he can't ask the enemy to save him. When we burn him on the fire. Ellie's stomach twisted. He's not the vessel, she said. You're making a mistake. Don't try my patience, Lancaster. He shoved Ellie away from Seth and Anna and ran to catch her. Hargraf lifted Seth easily with one hand, draping him over his shoulder, then strode back towards the sea wall. Ellie chased after him, her heart pounding. This is all wrong. He's not the vessel. He's just a boy. You're just frightened of a little boy. Coward! Hargraf stopped. He looked up at the crowd, who watched him with their hands to their mouths. He dropped Seth roughly at his feet, and the crowd jumped back as if the boy were a live firework. He turned and strode back to Ellie. His hand shot out and gripped her by the neck, driving her to the edge of the roof. You've never seen the enemy, child, he said, lifting her so that they were face to face. But I have. I saw it burst out of the vessel. It took my arm, even as I plunged my sword through its throat, while my friends lay dead around me. I see it still when I close my eyes. And the worst part is that I knew that vessel. He was a good, kind man. Yet from him emerged a creature of nightmare. Hargraf gripped Ellie's neck tighter. She batted desperately at his arm, coughing for air. Anyone can be a vessel, he said. Out of the corner of her eye, Ellie saw Anna rushing at Hargraf, only to be knocked back by a nudge of his shoulder, sending her tumbling. Ellie's vision crowded with white dots. Her thoughts turned hazy. Anyone. Little boys, little girls, and I'd kill them all to keep the city safe. And with that, he smiled and dropped her into the sea.